Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today. Chapter 1038, Night Visitor. Armed with new knowledge, Carl considered whether it really would be a good idea to make a trial tower. On one hand, it wouldn't really be necessary as the power would be surging now for 1,000 years or more. But on the other hand, if the tower lasted that long, it would help people remember how to access the system and maybe the next downturn wouldn't be so bad. Carl felt that amusement in his mind from the shrine again. The world dragon had a point. Even if he built the trial tower now in 1,000 years, nobody would remember how it was made, and it was more likely that they would either believe it was cursed or inactive, depending on if they could still remember how to use it. So, they would probably tear it down as the first one had been. That was the thing about time. Even the bronze dragons, with their infallible memories relegated irrelevant to the back of their minds, and if nobody thought to ask them, they would never think to go looking for those memories. Carl suspected that nobody had told most of them to begin with, but even the bronze dragons weren't immortal. As generations passed, those irrelevant memories didn't get passed down. Carl blinked and a vision appeared in front of him. The skies were filled with colorful wings and the ground was filled with giants. Between them, a million totem and mythic-ranked skills exploded at once as the dragons and titans went to war with each other. Spells shredded wings, dragon fire melted bodies, but just as fast as they died, they were brought back by the clerics of their respective species. Then the vision moved upward, looking at the world from a great height. All over the world, fires of destruction burned and the bones of slain species littered the ground. Only small pockets of life remained, hidden from the great war between the Titan gods' followers and the followers of the dragon gods. In those havens, humans, elves, dwarves, beasts, and monsters coexisted in peace. They had no other choice, the rest of the world was uninhabitable. Then the vision was gone, and Carl knew how the memories of the system's creation and essential access methods were lost. A great war had killed entire generations and destroyed every repository of knowledge in the world except what little had been brought by the survivors. There were few children, no elders, and only a handful of males of most species. They had evacuated in the traditional manner, women and children first. But the war had spiraled so far out of control that none had returned, leaving only the chosen guards behind to protect their people. What had caused such a battle where two sides fought each other to the brink of extinction was not included in the vision that Carl was gifted with. But it had most certainly happened in this world. Carl recognized the landmarks when the view had retreated up into the stratosphere. Carl heard his name being called and got to his feet. Thank you for the knowledge. I understand things so much more clearly now. I don't know what to do with that knowledge yet, but I will work on that. He informed the shrine, then stepped into the hall and found himself in front of the shrine for the silver dragon, the dragon god of magic, counterpart to the human god of magic. Where did you go? Tessa asked as Carl joined them in the hall. I went to offer some well wishes to the dragon gods. Are we all finished here? He asked. Tessa nodded. The chieftain found a shrine to the Orcish god of cunning, and he's finished his prayer, or whatever that was. His clan is stopping outside for the night. I suggest that we take rooms upstairs in case something happens tonight. She had a good point. Everywhere that they went in the interior of this nation, things got more and more dangerous with every change. Mira led them upstairs, and Carl smiled as he saw that the rooms were dorm-style, designed for a whole traveling group to bunk together. It was both the safest way to protect vulnerable members and the best way to prevent incidents between groups. In individual rooms, some might get ideas about causing trouble. But not nearly as often when their target would surely have backup. There was nobody else in the building except Mira, but Ray still took the spot nearest the door, just in case someone tried to visit them. The window was her first option, but there were bars on it, and she could still see it from her top bunk position. They were settled in for the night when a lone traveler showed up at the front of the temple in simple black robes. Mira was asleep, but the man seemed happy to wait, so Ray went to greet him in humanoid form. Hello, traveler? The caretaker is asleep, what can we help you with? She asked, wondering where she had met this man before. She definitely knew that aura, but this overlord-ranked cleric was unfamiliar. The man bowed politely. Lady Spider, I have come to the shrine hoping to commune with my god, might I spend the night in contemplation? Ray shrugged. I'm just a visitor as well, but the place isn't locked, so I don't see any reason that you can't go visit the shrine of your god. That's how temples work, right? If you want to sleep in a room, the empty ones have their doors open. The cleric nodded and Ray activated Night Haunter so she could follow him and try to determine where she knew him from. The strange cleric made his way through the hallways with ease, not frightened by the dark and not needing light to find his way through the silent temple. He clearly had no idea where he was going, only a vague direction, and had to double back a few times as the halls weren't neatly arranged and often simply ended at a larger shrine. But when he found the shrine to the god of the underworld, he went inside, and Ray felt the attention of the divine on him and on her. It didn't seem hostile, but somewhat wary of what she might do to introduce the cleric to his god directly. Not that Ray had any particular animosity towards the man, just on general principle. As he began to chant, Ray returned to the room. A death cleric talking to the lord of the underworld wasn't interesting, and she still couldn't figure out why the aura he gave off was so familiar to her. Chapter 1039, Incurable Curse. The next morning, they went down to invite Mira to breakfast, and the cleric was sitting on the front steps, staring at the sun and contemplating the clear morning sky. Stuck on a thought? Carl asked as he took a seat beside the cleric. The man nodded. Yeah, I've been searching for the key to immortality. You see, I've got an incurable curse on me, placed by a demigod. Nothing in this world can break it but intervention by the gods. Only, the Lord of the Underworld told me that there was a way to avoid it and live forever. Carl nodded. A curse to die young that can be avoided forever? I am likely going for the obvious here, but isn't that just a curse of undeath? The cleric stared at Carl as if he had just dropped legendary lore on him out of nowhere. I don't think that you're wrong. But wouldn't I lose my humanity? Carl shrugged and gestured out at the Orcish tribe. You might lose your humanity, but not being human doesn't mean that you can't be a decent person. The orcs barely understand human sensibilities, but once you understand how Orcish culture works, you'll find that they're not a bad bunch and they are living their best lives. It's the same with the dragons. They have their own ways of doing things, and it has little to do with how humans do things. I also know a few vampires, and while one is bats hit crazy, the other one is a really sweet girl. She works at our guild house in the store. The cleric was lost in thought for a while, then stood up. I will go speak to my god. Perhaps he can help me choose a path. Not many of the undead are suitable for an eternal existence, but if anyone knows how to achieve it, the god of the underworld will. Thank you, beastman. The cleric returned to the shrines while Carl stared out at the sky in his place, wondering what sort of chaos might come during the next few days. The changes had been short so far, so Carl didn't expect to be in this region for long. But if they made the best of their time here, they might be able to head off some of the early issues in the region, or they might gain a greater understanding of the myriad divine beings who were worshipped by the various species of this planet. Eventually, Carl got up and went for a short walk around the temple, mirroring the path that Ray had taken earlier looking for trouble. There, in the middle of a hedge maze in the backyard, he came across the most curious platform. The fact that it was there wasn't surprising. He had been following a stone walkway through the maze, and there were many sitting areas, like the hedge maze at the academy, which brought memories of his first few days with Dana. Carl was so lost in the pleasant memories that he almost missed that the sitting area was not like the others. There were no benches, and there were actual magical runes written on the stone, not just the poetry and historical messages like the others. Is this a portal platform? Carl wondered as he deciphered the runes. He could tell that Runemaster was translating for him, as this was no language that he knew or had seen before. But it was no normal portal platform. The spell was much too complex. But many of the runes were similar to the portal spell that he knew. So, it was a transport platform of some sort, but not a portal. Could it be a form of long-distance teleportation? While he was standing there recording the runes from the spell, Carl sensed a presence as someone joined him. Good afternoon. He greeted absently, only to be met with the surprised face of a pixie appearing in front of him. You knew that I was there? The creature asked in shock. Carl nodded. I sensed you there, but I couldn't see you until just now. I thought that you were behind me. The tiny woman, no more than 10 centimeters high, rubbed her chin in confusion. Interesting. I wasn't in this world until you said hello. Now it was Carl's turn to be confused. Then where were you? I was examining this platform when I sensed you. He asked. The pixie laughed. It's a gate to the Fey realm. A mirror of this world, but not for humans. I was looking out of it to see what sort of strange thing had happened to this realm lately when you said hello. Perhaps it was a side effect of Planeswalker? The skill was supposed to let Carl move between realms, but he had no idea how to actually operate it. Or, more correctly, he knew how to operate the skill, but he had nowhere to go. Only now that he thought about it, he did have somewhere to go. The Fey realm was adjacent to this world, and it felt like it was one layer above. Then, there should be a layer below. Carl focused on the skill and found that he could feel the cleric from this morning communing with the lower layer. That meant it was most likely the underworld, the land of the dead. A definite asset should he end up there. But he could also sense another place, immensely and overwhelmingly powerful. The pixie poked him on the forehead. Don't just go looking into the immortal realm like that. They don't like people spying on them, and we're both far from immortal. Until you gain immortality, they don't even consider you a sentient species there, and even the weaker immortals usually live like slaves. Kind of like what happens to the humans who can't access the system in the Monster Nations or the Dark Fey Kingdom. Carl withdrew his mind from the immortal realm, which appeared to be a collection of massive continents floating in a void. Thanks. I just gained the skill that made that possible, and I hadn't tested it before. Because he hadn't known it was possible. Chapter 1040, How the Changes Work. The pixie tilted her head as if listening to something Carl couldn't hear, then bowed politely. It's time for me to go home. Dinner is ready and Mom will be mad if I come back smelling like the mortal realms. Have a good morning, monster man. Then the pixie was gone, back in the Fey realm and flying off at hundreds of kilometers an hour. Carl tried not to laugh at being named the monster man by the Fey, who likely didn't even know what his class was. Most likely, the tiny creature was going either by smell or appearance, and Carl spent all his days looking like a cat demon. He really should start spending time as himself again instead of remaining in this form. But it was so much more comfortable this way. The fur of the transformation was temperature regulating and he didn't sunburn. So he was always comfortable whether it was hot or cold. Plus, Dana liked snuggling with his fur. Carl finished making notes on the spell to access the Fey realm in case that was needed for a related spell later and moved on to finish exploring the area. As he returned to the front, the cleric was outside again and in a much better mood. Did you come to a conclusion? Carl asked. The cleric nodded. My father is cousin to the king of Sholaha and I was expected to spend my life in service to the crown. That is not what I wanted in life, so I became a cleric. But now that mortality is catching up to me, my thoughts on life have changed somewhat. And while I was in contemplation, I saw souls moving south to the nation of Bomgan. I intend to follow them and learn the arts of the necromancer, but not with the aim of raising the undead. Instead, I aim to transform myself and, as you said, try to become undead, while holding on to the values that matter most to me. The cleric had just started walking away from the temple when the scenery changed, and Carl found that he was standing with the rest of the group in an open field again, next to a perplexed clan of orcs. Lotus looked around, then snapped her fingers in realization. I get it. I know how the changes work. Who here did something important just before the change? She asked. Everyone else shrugged. They were just relaxing after breakfast and Ophelia was in the gym in the middle of a set. Carl raised his hand. I was talking to that cleric, and when he made up his mind to head south to Bomgan to try to find his own path to immortality, the world changed. Literally 5 steps after he left, we were gone. Lotus nodded. I think that I know how it works. There were many unresolved issues in the past of this region. Now, time fluctuates here. So, every time that an unresolved event ends, it changes again. This time it ended early and I could feel the change focused on our location. I think that weird cleric guy is actually going to become someone important during the years between resurgences. Well, either that or he does something different now that we talked to him and the issue was fixed. From Lotus' shoulder, Remy laughed. If you just convinced the future Lord Bomgan or his mentor to become an undead, you're never going to live it down. His soul didn't look or feel like the undead lords. But thousands of years and a change of species might have changed that. It was more likely, Carl thought, that he had just met the man who preceded the current Lord Bomgan. Perhaps even his father. The Orc clan's chieftain came over to them for answers and Carl realized that they were back at the same spot where they had been before things changed. The Orcs' camp was still here and Orcs never left a mess behind when they moved on. The chieftain smiled at Tessa and Carl. Not as impressive as I was hoping for. There was no fighting at all. Carl smiled back. We can't win them all. But it was a good history lesson for everyone else. We learned a lot about the various gods. Did you gain any knowledge from the shrine to your Orcish god of cunning? The chieftain nodded. It gave me advice on how to search for the lost system relics. Which seemed strange at the time as there was one in the other room. But now that we have returned here, it seems like much better advice. Tessa gave him a curious look and the orc elaborated. He said that the stones didn't remain in one spot after they were hidden away. They are in a pocket dimension and we just need to find it so that we can claim it for the clan. Once it is found and opened in our present time, it should stay open at the will of the great chieftain that finds it. That might not be as grand as the search for the scale fragment that the majority of the world's orcs were on. But searching for a set of system stones would certainly make them one of the most powerful clans in the world if they actually found them. Just being able to advance classes at will as their clan advanced would be incredible. Plus, they could trade the other clans for access. There were dreams of becoming the most prestigious orc clan in the Dragon Isles running through the chief's mind. Nobody was likely to find the scale piece in the immediate future, so there was a chance here to elevate his clan for an entire generation or more. Not only that, but if they could advance their classes, he would have the roughest, toughest orcs anywhere, and they would make a whole generation of more powerful children. What more could a clan ask for? Tessa could see that there was much more to the message, or to the orcs' interpretation of it, but she let it slide. That was their own business, and they were already starting to pack up in preparation to move on to another location. Chapter 1041, If You Ask Politely. The orcs were just about to leave when portals began to open in the distance, encircling both them and Carl's group. Totem after totem stepped through the portals, then a flood of undead followed them onto the battlefield. Carl smiled at the chieftain. It looks like you get your fight after all. The gods smile upon those who ask politely. The orc agreed. Carl had no doubt that the Orcish chieftain had done exactly that when he got in contact with his deity. It was likely the very first thing that he asked for, followed by a request for information about the orc's quest. A totem-ranked bone dragon stepped onto the grass and roared, shaking the air with its fury. Looks like I have my first target. Pick the one that you want, but you should know that the Chaos Badger is definitely going after the necromancers. Carl informed his eager ally. In that case, I will take the unholy paladin. He looks like a worthy opponent. Do you have strong enough barriers to protect your ladies? The undead are looking quite intently at them. Carl nodded. I have a setup for them. Fight your heart out, my people can hold their own. As if to prove his point, Tian layered a totem-ranked earth barrier over everyone, including the chieftain. It gave Ophelia and Kara the same sort of stone fur that Tian protected himself with, while the others gained a simple metallic sheen of liquid metal barrier. It mostly made them look wet, but Naksha looked particularly majestic with metallic black scales. Carl took 2 steps away from the group, then activated Avatar. The mighty form of a totem-ranked world dragon filled the space between his group and the orcs, and the undead began to charge. The Beastman really lives up to his name. To think that he fights as a dragon. Very impressive. The chieftain laughed, then charged into the undead to find his target. Carl left his bodyguards summoned as dire bears to blend in with Ophelia and flapped his wings to charge the bone dragon. His first blow shattered a portion of the bone dragon's skullbone as brutal pugilist buffed the damage that Carl did with a disintegration-coated claw. Going after the enemy's weakest resistance was far more cruel of a technique than even the massive amount of bonus damage that the skill did. The 2 massive dragons lashed out at each other, and Carl's tail sent dozens of smaller undead flying as he twirled to keep the bone dragon from getting at his flank. The orcs cheered and laughed as 4 totem-ranked battles began at nearly the same time. Ray, Kara, the chieftain and Carl had all picked targets, and the other totems were on their way to try to restrain the rampaging dragon. Carl got a grip on the bone dragon's sternum and twisted, flipping the undead dragon over his body and slamming it into the ground. The cloud of dust and debris shaded the battlefield while the shockwave of the totem-ranked skills threw entire hordes of zombies off their feet. The creatures weren't intelligent enough to brace themselves against the impact, they just let themselves be toppled, then got up again. Opal and Tian teamed up to create an army of dwarven illusions with stone shields and hammers. The illusions couldn't take much damage, but the weapons could. So, they could face off against the undead hordes as a shield wall, and the others could fight over and around them. The illusions moved into place to stop the first rush of wights toward the orcs, then took a knee as the undead collided with them at a run. The orcs leapt over the shield wall to tear into the undead horde as it piled up and ground to a halt. Then, the second rank attacked over the illusionary dwarves and allowed them to push forward and regain their original position. That let the first group of orcs retreat to heal while another group advanced past the shield wall. Keeping all these barriers and items intact was the hardest that Tian had ever worked in his short life, but Brother Thor was keeping his eternal lightning barrier up on most of their team, including the orcs. If Thor could do that much as an overlord, a few dozen physical items shouldn't be impossible for him, Tian decided. Claws screeched on scale and bone as Carl and the bone dragon grappled with each other. 3 totem-ranked undead warriors had come to join the fight, leaving the Lich Lord and the Necromancers on the far side of the battle, far outside Carl's target priority. They were learning fast, Kara decided as she snuck up on a Necromancer. But they hadn't noticed when she tore apart the first one as they couldn't see over the taller forms of their swarm of undead. They had at least had the decency to keep powerful summoned protectors near themselves, but the Badger had a plan for that. All she had to do was sneak up, nullify the barrier, then Void Blast and claw the squishy living caster apart before his friends could react. Rinse and repeat for the others. But the undead knew that she existed, and when she tore the first one apart, she was immediately besieged with totem-ranked unholy attacks that forced her on the defensive. She couldn't even finish off the Necromancer in one smooth strike as she planned. She had to dive and weave through the undead army until she could get a chance to take down his barriers again and leap on him to deal with him using pure physical fury as all her power output was being used to keep herself alive. Kara celebrated her victory and retreated when the Necromancer gurgled his last breath. But the victory was short-lived as only a second later a pale shape darted out of the crowd and wrapped around him, then the Necromancer was back on his feet, looking groggy but alive. Consumption was necromantic magic that transferred life from summoned or controlled undead back to the Necromancer, an emergency survival spell, and it had triggered when he temporarily died like a mobile first aid kit. These undead really were getting annoying. But maybe Sister Ray was having better luck. Chapter 1042, Beasts Unleashed. Indeed, Ray was having better luck than the others. With her undead army spell and her golems, she had massacred 3 totem-ranked warriors already, and she was currently incorporeal, watching a terrified Necromancer plead for mercy. The unfortunate spellcaster could obviously see her, but Ray simply stepped through his ring of zombies and let him see the pure hunger in her many eyes as she stared down at him for his last few seconds. Night Haunter was way more fun when the target could see you. The zombies collapsed as Ray killed their master, then used entangling vines to make a pole to impale him on. Even if they tried to regenerate him, they would have to tear him down first with the vines spread through his insides. Carl let loose a Void Blast, and everything within 50 meters of him simply ceased to exist, except the bone dragon he was fighting. The pair crashed to the ground of the newly formed pit, and Carl used his strength advantage to smash the other dragon's skull off the knee of his rear leg. The unholy magic lashing at his body briefly dimmed as the dragon lost consciousness, then stopped entirely as Carl liberated the dragon's head from its body, shattering the spell that animated the creature. He pulled the large red core gem free from the bone dragon so that it didn't simply reassemble itself in a few minutes, then checked the battlefield. The chieftain was on his second target. Ray was running wild through the enemy totems, but Kara was in a bad way, fleeing through the undead as an enraged group of necromancers and a lich lord chased her. The Chaos Badger was laughing, but she was sending out 3 nullify spells a second to keep them from getting to her. Sister Kara really knows how to push people's buttons, doesn't she? Tian asked as they watched the battle for a second to ensure there was nowhere else they were needed. The fight under totem rank was solidly under their control, with the orcs and the ladies working together to herd the undead away from the wounded, who were guarded by Remy's team as Lotus operated her healing station. There is nothing that Kara loves more than making enemies mad, and these ones are really mad. Opal agreed. Kara got a split second of reprieve and a void blast exploded directly against the crotch of the necromancer's barrier. Good point. She's not even trying to kill them, just keep them too mad to realize that Ray has almost reached their position. Tian realized. Carl took flight and formed a massive Holy Blast, Tian's holy element attack skill. It would heal the orcs where it touched them, so there was no chance of collateral damage, and the amount of mana that he was pouring into the glowing ball of golden light in his claws was drawing the attention of every surviving totem. The group chasing Kara changed their focus and hurled counterspells at Carl, aiming to nullify the spell with unholy damage. Carl threw the spell at the ground, and the skills collided, creating a massive explosion that tossed him further up in the air and vaporized a large portion of the undead horde's reserves. Not quite what Carl had hoped for, but effective enough. The 3 totems who had been chasing Kara rose into the air to engage Carl at an altitude that wouldn't make the rest of the battle into collateral damage, and the Void Badger sighed. Up there, she couldn't hide at all. Instead, she turned her attention to the undead horde and the ones near the Orcish chief. He was having a glorious 2-on-1 battle, and she wouldn't interfere unless it looked like he was going to lose. But she could give him room to fight. Hawk was forced to retreat as the battle came into his airspace, and Carl told him that he could scout to ensure there were no hidden reserves. The bird had never gotten the hang of the humanoid transformation, and if they were going to fight over the main battle, that put Hawk in an impossible position. Unable to fight properly on the ground, unable to attack from the air. He even had the Lord of Destruction transformation that ignored most damage types. Maybe he could get away with that and a request to be shrunk? If he was the size of a regular bird monster again, he could fly close enough to the battle that he wouldn't be targeted by the totems. Carl gave him an assist with Unobtrusive Behemoth, and Hawk transformed into the ghostly fire elemental that was the Lord of Destruction. As hoped, the totems weren't interested in the Overlord-ranked bird. They had skeletal mages on the ground to deal with flying and fast-moving targets. Compared to the bird, this world dragon hatchling with its crazy damage reduction and massive strength was a much greater threat. You're finished today. The Lich Lord informed Carl in a dry tone. Perhaps if you had all come at me together, that might be true. But probably not. Carl disagreed. The undead prepared their spells and Carl hurled Holy Blast out in a wave in front of him. The 2 elements were a hard counter to each other, and the match at first appeared to be a stalemate. Only right behind the first wave was a second and then a third. The second wave of holy power crashed into the shields of the undead, which the third wave collapsed before beginning to burn their bodies. The totems recovered quickly, regenerating themselves as they brought up their barriers and used skills to counter the barrage of Void Blast attacks that Carl was hurling their way. You can run now and inform your lord that you failed. I am sure that he won't hold it against you, Carl suggested as the power around the undead visibly dimmed. Your skills are impressive, but not nearly impressive enough. The Lich Lord countered. He had a magical device in his hand and a smirk on his face. Say goodbye, you filthy creature. He chuckled. Goodbye, you filthy creature. Kara agreed. Right before she nullified his barrier and stole his magical orb, which she took immediately to her space for further inspection. Chapter 1043, Some Losses. The Lich Lord stared blankly at his empty hand, unable to comprehend what had just happened to him. Then the Void Blast hit his chest and his corporeal body was disintegrated, returning his soul to his phylactery even as the other 2 totems immediately fled the battlefield. That was a sure kill item, procured for them directly by Lord Bomgan and certain to do enough damage to bypass the damage reduction of even the monster man of Drod. They came here knowing that he was nothing ordinary and that he had beasts to support him, but the threat was on a whole other level. If they were going to eliminate him, it was going to take a mythic-ranked team leader. The problem with that was that you couldn't just move a mythic-ranked asset around the continent without a good reason or some preparation. Even in a region as unstable as Gabble, they would attract far too much attention. Worse, the monster man was rumored to be connected to the Chaos Dragon. If those 2 monsters started openly working together, nobody could stop them from doing whatever they pleased. There weren't more than a few dozen immortals living full-time in the Dragon Isles. Most of them moved to the Immortal Realm and only came home to visit every few years when they recruited promising candidates for their clans in the Immortal Realm, or were called upon by their families. The mana here was getting stronger, but the Immortal Realm was already strong enough to support steady growth to the demigod level if you could manage to stay in the most desirable regions. Meanwhile, in the Grand Palace of Homorvi, the capital building of Bomgan, the newly reformed Lich Lord stared at the Lord of Bomgan with pure terror in his eyes. Let me get this clear. You brought 10 totems with their armies of undead and you failed to kill even one member of the Monster Man's team? Did you even manage to kill any of the orcs that they were standing beside? Perhaps you managed to eliminate some burrowing rodents that were nearby. The Lord asked in an emotionless tone that sent chills through the Lich Lord's spine. There was soft laughter from the nearby nobles and Lord Bomgan turned his attention to the seer. Care to elaborate? What is so funny? The blind vampire woman smiled in his direction. They certainly killed more than one underground rodent. I have seen it. The aftermath of the battle between the bone dragon and the avatar of the world dragon obliterated the battlefield for nearly a square kilometer. Soon, there will be a new watering hole where the battle raged as the crater formed by the battle between them is 50 meters deep. The undead lords shook their heads in dismay. Seers were always a bit off as they lived the world through visions without their natural sight. But that one in particular was ancient and long since tired of living, so she had no fear of retribution for her attitude. Whoever thought that turning a cursed seer into a vampire was a brilliant idea had a sick sense of humor. Did the army manage to kill anyone at all? A single sentient being? Lord Bomgan asked. He had a faint smile on his face that terrified his lords, but the seer could only go by the dry monotone that he asked the question with. No. The only sentient casualties were our totems. Though we did recover most of the corpses, so you could say that there were no permanent casualties except the bone dragon. The monster man stole its core gem before it could be recovered. As far as the group accompanying him goes, forget having killed any of them. None of them sustained any injuries. Perhaps they are immortal? I don't know, they simply don't get injured when they are hit. You should invite them here. It might make the court a bit less insufferable if we let him rampage in the palace. Lord Drod actually laughed and the majority of the undead lords knelt and bowed before what they assumed was his rage. You don't get to die that easily, old woman. Besides, even if I brought him here, he has an uncanny connection to the Chaos Realm and he would most likely just ignore your presence. But it appears that his trip has granted him far more than expected. Advisor Fell informed the generals to focus on the coastal regions. If the world dragon had left his treasures in the core of the nation, the avatar would have found them by now. Now, get out of my throne room. All of you. Once the throne room was empty, Lord Bomgan turned to the seer, who was still standing in her position, lost in a vision. Once she returned to the present, Lord Bomgan cleared his throat. What did you see? The end of the last resurgence. I know where the system stones were then, but they are not there now. The temple is gone. She replied casually. Destroyed? Lord Bomgan asked. No, simply gone. I didn't see where it went, but not so much as a stone remains in the region. It was indeed where the monster man of Drod was standing. You weren't wrong to send the army after him right there. It was simply a few thousand years too late. Then she turned and left as Lord Bomgan considered the possibilities. The god of death had never failed him in all the years of his life. But against this particular pest, nothing worked quite right. But as he searched through his memories, Lord Bomgan knew exactly where the seer had seen the battle take place. He had been there before, a few centuries after the system failed, and there was indeed a temple at that exact spot. One run by an old crone from the Supreme Ladies Guild. However, he didn't recall there being system stones there. Perhaps she had taken them before he had arrived? He might need to change his tactics. If he was going to find the method to alter the system and exclude the food species and chattel from the system, he couldn't keep relying on the advice of the gods. The god of the underworld wasn't the only one willing to manipulate probability, and the most likely locations always had others on unrelated missions set by the other gods present. The other gods might not want him to find the system stones, but he would find a way to obtain them without relying on the advice of the gods. He just needed more time. Chapter 1044, Feel More Personal. Kara was immensely pleased with her new acquisition. She had no idea how it was supposed to work as she had failed to make it do anything but glow faintly with chaos energy, but as that was all she could make it do, it had been repurposed as a rather beautiful decorative night light over her bed. That might seem like a small thing to others, but they didn't understand how difficult it was to make chaos energy glow. Dana flopped down on the grass beside Carl as Thor and Hawk finished cleaning up the battlefield. The others had retreated into the tiny world to rest, but the afternoon was clear and warm, but not scorching hot as the desert had been. Well, that was quite the battle. Do you think that it's something personal between Lord Bomgan and us? She asked, unsure what to make of the situation. Yes and no. I am reasonably certain that he despises me, but I have the feeling that he's not deliberately targeting us but the locations we're standing at. As I recall, his goal was to remove the system from humans and others weaker than the undead. But we're standing on the former location of a full set of system stones. If I'm not mistaken, we've become a recurrent foil to his plans. We keep ending up at the best possible locations for advancements and system benefits, but those are also the locations that the undead army is trying to find so that they can destroy them. Carl mused. So, we just keep getting attacked everywhere that we go? Carl shrugged and rolled over to kiss her forehead. That's not really up to us, is it? If we keep ending up in the locations where system relics are, it's likely that we will keep getting attacked. But there are only so many of them to be found, so it might be months or longer before we run into another one. And by then, Lord Bomgan might have come up with a better idea. If it becomes a real issue, we can start exploring a different region for excessive numbers of monsters. The undead army is focusing on just this one region, so if we switch nations, there is a very low chance that we will keep having trouble with them. Dana was skeptical of that plan. She knew that no matter where they went, strange and unexpected outcomes would follow them, and the Lord of Bomgan might not be the biggest troublemaker that they attracted into their tangled web of fate. I will talk to the others about what they would like to do. There has to be some sort of solution that doesn't lead to the undead army sending stronger and stronger opponents at us until we're all dead. She quietly informed him. It will all work out in the end, you'll see. Carl agreed. Carl and Dana simply lay beside each other in the grass for a while, enjoying the afternoon sun until a disturbance in the distance caught Carl's attention. Something is coming, and it's not the orcs coming back. He whispered, not wanting to alert whatever was coming their way if it hadn't already noticed them. His aura was strong, and he wasn't trying to hide it, so if it was wild monsters, they should have realized that there was a totem-ranked threat in the grass here. Leaving his aura fully exposed was practically setting a warning flag on his location to chase wild beasts away. The group wasn't slowing, and they had adjusted their course to approach Carl directly. Definitely not an accident and possibly from a monster spawn. So, Carl got up out of the grass and watched the group of Naga as they approached. They slowed down 100 meters away as if confused and began casting some sort of spell. Not an attack, Carl decided. They were looking for something. Is there something I can help with? Carl called, loud enough to be heard by sensitive ears. A totem from the group slid over and nodded politely to Carl. We detected a queen nearby. A strong overlord, nearly a totem. The goddess demands that she be brought to the temple before her advancement. It is unconscionable for a queen about to ascend not to introduce herself. The Naga warrior insisted. Carl smiled and Dana chuckled. Remy would definitely introduce herself. She loved making new friends. And then using them as experiment volunteers. She is in a separate space right now, that is why you haven't detected her properly. Let her finish her alchemy project and she will come out to properly greet her kinsman. Carl explained. The young queen is a skilled alchemist. The totem asked hopefully. A master runic alchemist. Carl agreed. Dana poked him in the side. If these Naga insisted that Remy stay with them, there would be real problems for the group. The Naga didn't react other than to coil his lower body into what looked like a comfortable resting position. Clearly he had nothing more to say and no intention of moving until he had met Remy. Carl opened the tiny world's entrance and Dana retreated to join the others and pass a more detailed version of the situation than the system chat had been able to convey. But Remy was already finished her potions as she had just been making healing potions to trade with the next location they visited. The orcs didn't buy them, but everyone else should, and she might be able to get more species of plants for her recipes. Remy slid out to greet the Naga chieftain and the whole delegation bowed down, laying flat on the grass. Your Majesty, it is a pleasure to meet you. The goddess requests your presence at her temple. The chieftain insisted. These are my people, we will all have to travel together. How far is it to the temple? Remy asked. 500 kilometers. Not more than 10 days travel. Remy chuckled. It was so strange to hear someone describe travel in days when they had Hawk, Thor, and Carl. I think that we can make it there faster than that. If you join me in the carriage, the rest of your team can rest in the separate space and we can make it much faster. She insisted. The Naga looked vaguely insulted. Your Majesty, it is an important part of the ritual to travel to the temple under your own power. We can let your people come to the city, but they cannot enter the temple with you once we arrive. He explained. Remy shrugged. We will sort that out once we are there. But 10 days travel on the grass, is that really necessary? The chieftain tried not to laugh. The young queen really was a born regent, even if she was raised among other species. Chapter 1045, Afraid of Heights. The Naga considered Remy's position. How about we travel by other methods until we reach the swamps? If we travel the last day on our own, that should be enough to please the goddess. Remy nodded happily. Invite the others over and I will show them a good spot to rest as we travel. How are you with heights? The Naga looked confused. Heights, Your Majesty? I don't understand. I was going to ask one of the others to let us fly on their back as my spirit snake is not fast enough for the purpose. Riding on their back, we can make it 500 kilometers before it gets dark. We're headed to Kathar in Nulmalgat. Or into the swamps just east of the city. It's not that far. The hopeful tone said that he was definitely afraid of flying but didn't want to say it out loud. Carl cleared his throat. We can have Thor pull the wagon and spend the next few days going over land instead. It's simply more efficient to get there on wings. Thor perked up his ears when he heard the word wagon. It sounded like they would have things to do again soon. The rest of the search team came over, all overlords. They showed signs of recent battle with damaged and stained gear, but their wounds were all healed. Naga had some natural regeneration, and while it wasn't on the level of the regeneration skills, it was still good enough that minor cuts and such would heal in a matter of hours. There was a shaman among them, a young boy. He was giving Remy a most reverent look like he had just seen a movie star. Carl was keeping an eye on the young Naga and Remy tried not to laugh. The Carl was worried about her virtue, but the young shaman was far too cute and naive. He grew up among Naga while Remy had a much more interesting group of siblings. She knew how to deal with strangers who were too forward. Sister Ray taught her. Follow me. There is a swamp area in a separate space that should be comfortable for everyone. I have built resting platforms, but do try not to overfish the waters. The numbers are limited and they are part of a breeding experiment. She explained, then motioned for the others to follow her through. The mana level in the tiny world was increasing with Carl's power, he noticed. He had tied it to his power instead of letting it feed entirely off the outside world so that the others could get higher quality mana. A feeling it now reminded him that he could start to expand the space again. His mana pool was many times what it was when the spell was created, so he shouldn't have any problems increasing the tiny world by at least a third. But he also noticed that it was lacking in the fundamental rules that the system had enlightened Carl to when he reached totem rank. If nothing else, he should use the rule of mana manipulation to enhance the space. Everyone used it to meditate and increase their internal energy levels, and that rule would help the process. However, that would have to wait until they didn't have guests. The chieftain inspected the section of swamp that Remy led them to and smiled at the young queen. Her hospitality was impeccable, and there was a whole set of platforms and thatch-roofed shelters in the swamp for them to rest as they traveled. But even more importantly, the mana was thick, there were fragrant plants all around, and no predators, so they could rest peacefully. "You have a wonderful home," he insisted. Remy shrugged. "It's more like my garden. I mostly live in my alchemy lab, and that's over there in the stone building. You can't have the outside elements interfering with the process." "I understand. It is important to have the right environment to work. Now, would you prefer to rest first, or shall we take out the carriage and have the shaman summon an elemental to pull it?" Remy laughed. "We have a behemoth with us who greatly enjoys pulling the wagon. We also have the ability to summon large beasts when he needs a rest, so don't worry about the carriage." Remy led him back outside, where Thor was already set up with his size reduced to suit the carriage. "Oh, this is nice," the chieftain insisted, then climbed up into the cargo area at the back. He was rather large to be sitting in the front, though it wouldn't be a problem for both him and Remy to fit, as the carriage typically seated 8 comfortably. Being in the back, with the cover off, he could rest his upper body on the roof of the carriage and see everything that was going on around them, as well as giving Carl directions and serving as an extra guard. Remy called her bodyguards, who took up their usual spots on the running boards of the carriage and then settled in the front while Carl urged Thor to start heading east. Like a proper queen being escorted to a new city. The route that they took at the start didn't matter as much, as there were no mountain ranges between them and their destination, so all they had to do was find the easiest path in the right general direction and then adjust when they were close. "Will the rest of your companions be staying in the separate space?" the chieftain asked Carl once they were moving. "Yeah, it's easier if they all remain there. We have enough room for them to join Remy up front, but they only usually do when they need to be ready for something, and Remy would normally be in her lab. The carriage itself is a distraction, as it's easy for the monsters from the spawns to see, and that was why we were out here. Removing excess threats, you might say," Carl explained. "What an odd mission. We rarely concern ourselves with issues beyond the swamps, but you have come so far. Your guild title says that you are from Drod. Well, we have some time. How about we share stories?" Chapter 1046, Toward the Swamp. Chapter 1046, Toward the Swamp. The Naga seemed enthralled by the experience of riding on a carriage pulled by a behemoth, and Thor was moving much more quickly than his people could constantly move across the grass. Naga were extremely fast in burst movements, like the snakes they resembled, but for long distances they weren't all that impressive. They were faster than many of the bipedal species, but compared to the behemoth who was casually jogging along with the carriage, they were far slower. This speed would be nearly as fast as they could sustain for a few minutes, not a casual all-day pace. "How have things been in the swamps?" "I know that Gabble is a special case, and we have information to relay to them about exactly what seems to be happening. But how much of that has been spreading east across the border?" Carl asked, striking up a conversation with the lounging Naga. "Things are pretty good in the swamp. The shaman goddess protects the swamps, so most of the spawned monsters stay away unless the incidents started in the swamps themselves. But sometimes that is a good thing. We had a crocolisk spawn not long ago, and that will be food for many months. It's not the most common outcome, but when the monsters or beasts are an edible species, it is a huge windfall for the tribes of the entire region. It's not just Naga, you see. The lizardmen have many tribes in the territories around ours as well. Then the various Fae tribes. Many types of Fae like to live in the swamp, especially the wisps and the witches." Carl was confused. "I thought that the witches were a system class? Like, not their species, but their specialization?" The Naga laughed. "Oh yes, those are witches too. But I mean the various types of Fae witches. Water witches, swamp witches, forest witches. There are more, but those 3 all live in the swamps. Mostly the swamp witches, who are the only dark Fae out of the 3. They're a nasty piece of work, but they've got powers that can really help if you find a way to negotiate with them. Usually, we find a witch doctor among the trolls and send them to do it. The swamp witches and the witch doctors seem to have an understanding, and they can usually work out some sort of deal that isn't open-ended or with surprise payments due." Carl chuckled. "I know a human witch doctor. She has her whole body covered in tattoos of power. It's quite the sight." The Naga chuckled. "The trolls only wish that they could use such an ability. It's part of their class skills, but you can't tattoo or scar a troll, so none of them can practice it. That has to be frustrating. Such a powerful skill, and they can't even use it. But can you imagine a passively buffed troll that has twice the usual strength and stamina? They would be unstoppable." Carl laughed. The Naga shook his head in dismay. "Don't go giving them ideas, they might just find a way." Carl was reasonably sure that he knew the way already. Instead of tattooing them, you could paint it on and just refresh the ability when the paint wore off. The trolls probably already did it, as he had seen them wearing war paint in the past. They idly chatted through the day, and when the sun started to go down, Thor stopped the wagon to be swapped out for a giant dire bear who would pull them through the night. "This really is efficient." By morning, we might have to switch to something aquatic. Our destination is actually on the east side of the swamps, so if we're going to take the most direct route, there will be many muddy roads along the way. That's all right. We're already making good time. I'm sure nobody will be too upset about a slower rate when things get muddy. Are there actual roads, or would we be needing a boat? I have the ability to make a flat-bottomed boat to take us through the swamp. Carl suggested. The Naga considered that. If we alter our course a little, we can reach the headwaters of the Gund Fork long before we reach the swamp. Then we can follow that almost all the way to the temple. It's only a few kilometers from the river. Hawk, do you see a river in front of us somewhere? Carl asked. Northeast. The road doesn't go anywhere near it, but it should be easy to get to. I can turn the carriage northeast toward the river now. Carl offered. Northeast? No, it should be east, past the road, closer to the village of Nararam. Carl shrugged. He didn't know any of the river names. Oh, I see it. That's still 100 kilometers away. You will be there tonight sometime. My scout says that he found the one you mean. It's 100 kilometers away. Your group must have been searching for some time. Carl explained. The Naga nodded. We were sent out over a month ago, expecting trouble in locating anything within the wilds of Gabble. Carl sighed. That's quite the adventure. I can only imagine how many times you had to double back, searching for a target that kept moving. We've been all over the place in the last month or two. The Naga laughed. Fortunately, we have the seers linked to us so they can give updates. They tell us where we're most likely to find what we're looking for and we adjust our position. But until we met Queen Remy, we didn't know exactly what we would find. Carl nodded in understanding. Remy is an interesting one, and it would be hard to expect someone just like her, even if you knew that it would be a Naga queen her age. She's gone through a few major changes as she advanced as well. Some of that is the new skills that I have taught her using the talents of my class, most of it is her own hard work and dedication to studying. The Naga looked impressed. She is remarkably studious for a young queen. It is somewhat more common for them to live a few decades as a spoiled debutante after they rise from the rank of princess. But then even the princesses are notoriously spoiled as they are expected to become the next leaders of their tribes even if they can't advance and become true queens. Though our people have advanced past the state where we were unable to deny the will of our leadership caste, they innately hold a huge amount of power and respect among the Naga simply for what they are. Leading us is literally ingrained in their genetics. Chapter 1047, to Nararam. Chapter 1047 to Nararam. The bears carried them through the night as Hawk rested, and by the time that the sun came up, they were at the lone road that ran north up the eastern side of Gabble. Nararam should be just south down this road. Do you want to go through the city, then to the river, or continue east and pick up the river in the wilderness? Carl asked once the Naga woke up. You're still awake? The Naga asked, surprised to see Carl. Sort of. I prefer to meditate so I don't have to leave my spot. The golems give me enough input to keep us out of trouble. That's why I used my own golem. Carl explained. The Naga nodded. That's a good idea. Not many have the skills to do that, but your class is a unique one. Carl shrugged. I'm technically in my third class now. I started as a beast master and then advanced. Each has been better than the one before, so no complaints. Oh, what sort of class comes two advancements after a rare class? Remy laughed from inside the carriage. This should be entertaining. It's still a beast master base, but beast master champion. It helps advance both me and my beasts, but primarily the changes were that it designated me as the avatar of the world dragon and granted a new transformation and some related abilities. Carl explained. The Naga stared at him in silence, unsure how to answer that. Avatar of the world dragon as a class skill? What sort of broken skill was that? And what sort of related skill would even come with a power like that? So, you can transform into a dragakin? He tried. Carl shook his head. A totem-ranked world dragon. The Naga slowly blinked, first one set of eyelids, then the other. Carl shook his head. A totem-ranked world dragon. The Naga slowly blinked, first one set of eyelids, then the other. Well, that's unexpected. So, your skills are all focused around being a dragon? No, my skills are all focused around improving both myself and the beast team. New skills, higher combat power, even the option to add more group members. The dragon transformation is more of a flex on enemies than a core skill of the class. Carl explained. Remy and the Naga team leader both laughed. Transforming into a totem-ranked dragon was an immense flex on any enemy that you might be facing. Especially to a Naga or any other scaled species. As far as scaly creatures went, dragons were the pinnacle of performance. The morning passed smoothly as they headed for the river, but when they finally arrived, the Naga realized that there might be a problem with this plan. You couldn't put something as large as a carriage in your system inventory unless you had a special skill for it. Plus, they didn't appear to have a boat. The first problem was solved when Carl helped Remy down from the carriage by letting her transform into a reduced form of her spirit snake form and drape herself over his shoulders. Then Thor took his carriage back into his space, and Tion created a large metal flat-bottomed sailboat. Carl jumped over to land in the boat, then let Remy use her basic, elemental control to create a gust of wind to push it to shore. Climb in and we will head down the river. The current is flowing with us and Remy can make a steady wind or use water manipulation to push us along faster. Both Naga looked happier now that they were on the river, and the older Naga chuckled as they started to move. Normally we have someone stick their tail in the water to push the raft, but this is fancy. I like it. But will it be alright when we get to overhanging branches? He asked. We can switch techniques when it comes to that. I can also choose aquatic beasts as my golems so we could have them pull the boat if we needed to. Remy paused. She hadn't thought about that. There were some excellent fish monsters. Not particularly powerful, but if they were summoned as golems, they would be totem ranked by default. If Carl summons something like a silver catfish, a commander rank river monster, it could swim at nearly 50 kilometers an hour. Hawk had found a few of them while scouting in Drod. You should call the water golems. It will be fun, like a water wagon, Thor suggested. The concept of a wind-powered floating wagon was just too weird, in his opinion. Remy hid her dismay at his lack of enlightenment. Even on land, you could push a carriage with wind if you wanted to. But such a concept was anathema to Thor's Sero-developed mindset. Strong legs were far better than letting something as soft as air try to do the work. The silver catfish had no good way to hook up a harness, but Ray solved it by creating a bit to go in their mouth like the ones you use to guide horses. The fish could pull the boat that way and it wouldn't interfere with their fins. She passed the custom-crafted rope to Carl, who hooked it to the boat and passed it to the golems. Then they were really off to the races, skimming along the water at breakneck speed as Remy laughed in joy. With no natural wind, the surface of the river was glass smooth, perfect for high-speed boating. Now, we just need to keep the speed up for half a day and we will be close to the temple, Carl announced. The Naga laughed. There was little chance that would actually happen. Even with 4 totems in their group, they were sure to be either accosted by offended monsters or questioned by the tribes whose territories they were passing through. A major river was an important part of many territories and they wouldn't allow just anyone to go down it without at least checking them out. His group of investigators had been stopped dozens of times before they had made it to the Gabble border, and some of the stops took entire days to settle passage rights through the territories of tribes they had no agreements with. If the sky wasn't so terrifying, he would have suggested that they fly over and avoid this part. Chapter 1048, Lizard Checkpoints. The first signs that the Naga's fears would come correct came half an hour later, long before they had even reached the swamps where he was concerned about the tribes. Their way was barred by a pair of lizardman warriors, each with a team behind them stationed on both sides of the river with a net stretched across the width. Carl had the fish slow them to a stop but waited in the middle of the river. Good morning, what seems to be the issue today? He asked politely while the lizardmen stared at him. There is a toll to pass. You have traveled through our territory without a permit. The lizardman demanded, but Carl could hear the fear in his voice. For amusement value, he let an aura leak using one of his less used Packmaster skills. Dominating power, the Packmaster's aura gains a mental domination effect at will, requiring weaker minds to submit to his will. Hypnosis type ability. He wasn't giving the lizardmen any sort of intimidating look, but he could see them begin to cower under the power of the oppressive aura. The leaders of the 2 groups managed to stand firm, holding the net across the river as Carl reached into his inventory and took out a handful of gold coins. How about I pay the fee in gold? 2 coins for each of us should be fine. That's 3 for each of you, he insisted. The lizardman bandits were about to remind him that this was a robbery and that his way down the river was blockaded, but after careful consideration both nodded. It was better to let this one pass. They caught the coins Carl threw at them and lowered the net as the lizardmen behind them complained. It was only 3 people in a fast boat. Even with a pair of totems, they weren't a threat to a whole clan, so they should have been grabbed and forced to turn over their valuables before they were killed. At least, that was the consensus of those too far away to feel Carl's aura. But the boat was already past the net and moving faster than they could run. Not that Carl would make it far. They weren't the only bandits along the river, and the next tribe wasn't welcoming to outsiders. Carl found that out in person only an hour later. This time, the tribe had placed a raft in the middle of the river with a pair of overlord-ranked warriors on it, waiting for them to arrive. If that was intended to fight them, it would be laughable. But Carl could feel that there were totem-ranked warriors in the village nearby, and these were just the border guards. So, again, he pulled to a stop and wondered if there was a better way to deal with lizardmen. Good afternoon. We are headed east to Kathar. Might we get passage through your territory? We have room for an escort if you want to send one with us. Carl called. Disembark. Our chief needs to speak to you. End any transformation spells and lower your barriers. The border guard insisted. The Naga team leader got worried when Carl smirked and Remy began to giggle, but there was nothing he could do when she transformed back from her minimized spirit snake form and Carl splashed into the river as an enormous dragon. The lizardmen were utterly baffled. What do we do now? One of them whispered. Well, they did it, so I guess we take them to the chief? I don't know. Nobody ever complied before. His partner whispered back. Remy turned to their escort. You know, this might be easier if we let you rest with the others until we're close. The Carl is superb at dealing with other species. The Naga rolled his eyes. That remains to be seen. Carl pranced out of the river in a way that reminded Remy of Thor when he was happy. A bit too bouncy to be casual. But she turned the wind to blow the boat to shore so she could get out and put the boat in her space after everyone had disembarked. No need to risk it getting damaged. Why the fuck is there a dragon on my lawn? She heard someone yelling, then winked at the Naga beside her. See, all is planned. Carl's amused voice replied to the village chief. Your guards insisted I should come in this form instead of my travel disguise. I can change back, it's much more convenient for conversation even though your grass is soft under the feet. By the time that Remy got to the center of town, Carl was back in cat demon form and the lizard man was looking tense. Now, you were here to request passage through our territory? The chieftain asked. Carl nodded. Yes, we are going east down the river and my friend is afraid of heights. So, we decided to go down the river. The lizardmen weren't sure what to make of that, but the embarrassed look that the Naga was giving made it clear who Carl was talking about. The lizardmen of the tribe began to gather in case the stranger was a threat. They had their pride, and just letting strangers show up and move through their territory without so much as a formal request to the chief made them territorial. Carl couldn't have made an advance request as he had no idea their territory existed. But telling them that would only make things worse. The lizardman chief didn't know how to respond. They couldn't stand the Naga, but that was a world dragon. Lizardmen worshipped the dragons nearly as much as the drakes, though they didn't claim to be descended from dragons themselves. I will grant you permission to pass through the territory one time. Your boat is fast, so I request that you are gone by evening. The chief decided. That was enough to keep his people happy. Make the intruders leave by the end of the day and don't let them linger and hunt the tribe's resources. Chapter 1049, Forget Boating. Once they were out of sight of the village and Carl had ensured that there was nobody trying to follow them, he turned to the Naga. I will transform and bring Remy with me to the city of Kathar. This is becoming too much of a nuisance, and if we don't change methods, we're guaranteed to get into an unnecessary fight. Carl insisted. The Naga sighed, then nodded. I won't argue. The lizardmen control the first part of this region and they hold a grudge against the Naga, so they won't make it easy for us. Carl opened the tiny world's entrance for him and called for Thor to escort him to the others as they were spread out through the swamp area in the tiny world. Then he transformed and went for a swim in the river as Remy climbed on his back and put away the boat. Once that was done and the golems were dismissed, Carl flapped up into the air with Remy stretched out flat on his back. Water control let her create a loop to hold herself in place, though the world dragon form had ridges on its back that would make for a fairly sturdy grip even without eternal lightning over them both, keeping the wind off her. Carl didn't go as high as Hawk usually did as the air got cold up there and Remy wasn't a fire element creature. But flying lower gave them an excellent view of the territories that they passed over and let Carl memorize a few new spots to add to his list of possible portal destinations. Every few minutes, he could see that someone had noticed them and pointed up at where he was flying overhead, but Carl was moving so fast that none of them put in the effort to try to intercept him. It simply wasn't worth it. This is so much better. Wandering around the swamp on a boat was not only slow, but there were annoying people everywhere. Flying over populated areas is better. Look, they're even waving hello at us. Remy narrated as they flew. I think that they're actually trying to cast a spell to knock us out of the sky, but they don't have the range to make it this high. Carl laughed. They were definitely using magic, he could feel it even from this distance. Should we go tell them to behave? Remy asked. She could probably hit them with a potion from here, but she left all the randomly exploding ones in the tiny world, not in her own space where she could more conveniently grab them. What Carl could not have known was that the mere presence of an avatar of the world dragon was enough to influence the system and that they were not casting hostile spells at him. They were casting celebratory blessings on the children who had just awakened their classes. Some of the waving was hostile or annoyed, but only when they hadn't linked his presence to what was happening in the villages. Carl followed the river to the border, then circled for a moment when he saw the ruins of an ancient wall. It would have once been a mighty defensive fortification between Gabel and Nulmulgat, but now it had gone thousands of years without maintenance and most of it had collapsed or had been deconstructed to reuse the stones for housing. That was what Mira had feared would happen to the temple when she was gone, but there was no sign of the temple at all when the change happened. Not even a foundation was left and none of the houses nearby were ancient or made of stone. Then Carl continued east down the river for a few hundred kilometers until the road crossed at a grand stone bridge and headed east to a city of around 60,000 people. That had to be Kathar as it was the only large city in the region according to the map that he had. The rest were all small villages and tribal camps of the Naga, trolls and lizardmen. So, Carl descended from the sky to land near the west gate and let Remy down. She chose to remain in spirit snake form so that she could float near his shoulder instead of landing in the muddy street. You know, for a Naga, you really are a clean freak. Carl joked as he transformed back. Remy wiggled in what he thought was a shrug. Swamp water is like a herbal bath, but I can smell the nastiness in that mud. Dirt roads are just gross. So, Carl walked up to the city walls with Remy floating near his shoulder. They were met by a large mountain troll, close to 4 meters tall and broad-shouldered, with thick gray skin and curious green eyes that sparkled like gemstones. State your name and business. The troll announced in a bored voice that contradicted his clear interest in the answer. I am Carl and this is Remy. We are stopping here on our way to the Naga Shaman Temple. The guard nodded. Do you have an invitation to the temple? They don't accept random visitors. Carl smiled. They sent a request for us, yes. The guard smiled, showing obsidian black teeth. 1 silver coin each to enter the city. If you wish to enter the auction, seats are for sale on your left and items can be evaluated at the building on the right. Oh, in that case, I might enter an item for the auction. I should have something worth selling to recoup the cost of the trip. Carl agreed. He still hadn't had time to make anything totem-ranked, but he had a number of Overlord-ranked items with him. So he paid the toll and led Remy into the auction's evaluation house where a young Naga warrior stood staring at them in shock. Good morning. Carl tried as the man wasn't moving. Good morning, sir. Good morning, your majesty. I like these people. They're all so polite. Remy giggled in Carl's mind. I get the feeling that their shock at seeing a queen is going to lead to something troublesome. Carl countered. How much trouble could they cause? I have a car with me. Chapter 1050, Kathar City. Carl took out an Overlord-ranked sword created with runes for sharpness and skill damage amplification and placed it on the counter between them. I would like to have an item evaluated for auction. He explained. The Naga nodded rapidly, breaking himself from his shocked stupor. Of course, sir. That is certainly to be acceptable to the auction house. Even with the dungeons producing more gear lately, there isn't much Overlord-ranked gear circulating. That was only natural. Most people who had the power to do Overlord-ranked or higher dungeons didn't spend all day grinding out gear for sale. They could afford to live well after only a few visits. Lower-ranked dungeons often had lineups to enter, but that was seldom the case for more powerful ones. Those were more likely to have local bounties for their completion and the resources inside. The Naga called out a supervisor while Remy contemplated how he was speaking common. Naga mouths were not made for that, but while he had an accent, he was definitely speaking common. The supervisor was an aged demon with light violet skin, but agile movements Carl didn't expect from someone as wrinkled as he was. Now, what do we have here that my man can't price? Oh, that is wonderful, a crafted weapon. Tell me, where did? No, you made that one personally. I can see the maker's mark in the system information. This is most excellent work. Are you certain that you want to put it up for auction? There are no reserves and no withdrawing after bidding has started. He asked. Carl nodded. I can always make another, and I collected more than enough elven steel from the dungeon at Bara for our guild's mastersmith. The demon looked curious. You have a true mastersmith? A dwarf. Carl shook his head. No, a demon named Ashbringer. The auction house representative nodded, not knowing the name. He had been hoping it was a dwarven master, as their work was known as high enough quality that it would demand a higher price simply because a dwarven master had created it. The auction is tomorrow morning and runs until later in the afternoon, depending on the number of items presented. As a contributor, here is a pass for you and your +1 in the back rows, so you can watch the sale. They shook hands and Carl headed into the city with Remy floating at his side. Ooh, they have new forms of cake. You have to stop there. Get at least 3 of each. Remy insisted. 3 of each. Remy nodded. 1 for me, 1 for Lotus, 1 is referenced to make more. The beastskin girl working the counter gave them a tired smile as they entered. Sir, madam. Welcome to Annette's Bakery. Do you know what you would like, or would you like me to explain our offerings? She asked, clearly a rehearsed line. Carl smiled back at her. Actually, I need 1 of every flavor of cake that you have sliced for 12. Then I need 3 of each of the squares and puff pastries. I have a large group who would like samples. The girl looked panicked. That was half of the goods in the store. Sir, that will be quite expensive. She began, but Carl set a small sack of gold coins on the counter and she gulped. I see. Very well, sir. Remy silently celebrated as the worker packed up box after box of treats. Lotus had gotten new food-related skills when she changed classes, and one of them was to recreate simple baked goods that she was familiar with. It wasn't perfect, so she still had to make most things from scratch, but she could just conjure the puff pastries and then make the fillings, which was so much faster when they needed sweets. Puff pastries were the peak treat in Remy's mind, as they were bite-sized no matter what form she was in. She could just pop them in her mouth intact, and that was much better than having to cut bits off to eat. In fact, in this greatly reduced spirit snake form, they would completely fill her mouth. It was just a shame she couldn't make herself even smaller. The baker came out as the girl was packing up the last of the food, which Remy quickly moved to her space for safekeeping. Damn it. The woman muttered, looking at all the sparse shelves. Sorry, if we had known that we needed so much, we would have sent word ahead of time, but we just entered the city. Carl apologized. That's all right, sir. I have extra help coming in tonight anyhow, as the auction day tends to be one of our busiest. Carl and Remy left the shop and headed into the street, looking for a spot to stay the night. Well, somewhere to safely pretend they were staying for the night, as there was no need to bring everyone out of the tiny world into separate rooms. There weren't many inns in the city, and it looked like most of the merchants were staying in their carriages, parked in the street. Even the beasts pulling them remained in place and were mostly still hooked to the carriages, with feed bags in front of them. We might have miscalculated. Perhaps we should have brought out the carriage and had everyone exit from there. Carl muttered, then spotted a sign with a picture of an ale mug on what looked like a 3-story inn. Never mind, we should be in luck. He stepped inside the dingy tavern, and the heads of 24 beastkin briefly turned toward his feline form, then turned back to their drinks. Carl nodded to the waitress, who gestured to a table. What can I get you, handsome? Carl smiled at her, and the cat girl purred. I was hoping you have a room for rent for the night. I have a few friends waiting to be called through a portal, and we need a spot to stay until the auction is over tomorrow. The waitress nodded. Indeed, we do have rooms for beastkin and dwarves. It was clear that she meant only for beastkin and dwarves and not because of size issues. Carl frowned. If you count dragon priestesses as beastkin, then we're in luck. The waitress smirked. I will pay you to stay here if you have one who can create rice. The blight beetles got almost the whole crop this year. Carl winked at her, then reached into the tiny world and grabbed Lotus, opening the space just enough to pull her out. Hey, I was Bunny. The locals began to laugh as one unfortunate man panicked. But Carl kept a hold on the excited priestess, who thought that she was being given a present. You're not here for bunny ears. I called you to help this lovely lady with her kitchen inventory issues. Take Remy with you as well, she has treats for you to try. The waitress took the odd pair into the back of the tavern, where the smell of stew and fresh-baked bread wafted through as the door was opened. You're going to have to plead for mercy when the old woman comes out here. The foxkin man beside Carl whispered. Probably. High Priestess Lotus is a bit intense, especially in a confined space. The beastkin snorted in amusement. The matron of the inn is from a family of mice. Carl wasn't sure where that stood in relation to the fluffiness of bunnies, but he suspected that the old woman would not be happy with his volunteer helpers. Chapter 1051. I'm helping. Sure enough, 30 seconds later, one very annoyed old woman with a scarf over her head, covering her hair and her ears, stomped out and smacked him over the head with a wooden spoon. Then she placed her hands on her hips and glared at him. In my defense, she is the best in my group with food creation. Carl tried. And you didn't think to send someone to keep her in line? One experiment-obsessed Naga queen is not enough. They just hype each other up. Carl could see that. Especially in the kitchen when Remy was excited about experimenting with new foods. Anything that could be turned into a research project was enough to get Remy excited, and if it was both an experiment and edible, it was even better. After all, food was the introductory level of alchemy in Remy's mind. All the mixing and precise measurements, none of the requirements that the creator have magical aptitude. Carl patted the little mouse woman, who huffed and turned away. They'd better be helpful in the kitchen with all the mess that they're making. She muttered as she walked away. Ask them to make you extra sweets and to stock your pantry. High Priestess Lotus will help you out. Carl called after her. The beastin laughed quietly as the angry chef returned to her work, then laughed harder at the sound of happy squeaking after the door was closed. She could pretend to be angry all that she wanted, but her instincts got the better of her once she was alone with Lotus and a kitchen full of fresh vegetables. Well, now that we know we will be getting a well-stocked pantry for the next week, what would you like to drink? We have ale, meat and wine. Or dwarven whiskey if you have deep pockets. The waitress asked. Ale is good. I'm sure that they'll have something special for dinner soon. Lotus loves to cook almost as much as she likes fluffy ears. The waitress shook her head in dismay. One day I will meet a sane green dragon cleric. Carl shook his head. That's the problem. This is as sane as they get. The green dragons are just as excitable and curious as their clerics. So, while they can be rational, they're never going to not want to touch the fluffy thing. The waitress smiled gently and nodded. That makes sense. We tell our children to watch for them like they're a terror, but I can't recall the last time that I heard of a green dragon cleric intentionally starting a fight. They get in plenty, but they never mean to start them. Thor relayed the situation to the others, who were happy to remain in the tiny world for the night instead of coming out to deal with whatever chaos Lotus and Remy had caused. Thor had explained fairly well that the spot Carl had found was not very welcoming, but it would be good enough for the evening, and then they could come out tomorrow to see the city if they wanted. However, his description didn't make it sound all that appealing, other than the food that was promised once Remy and Lotus were done experimenting. Really, this city wasn't all that grand. It was large and built on somewhat of a hill, so it wasn't too swampy, but the land around it was still very much waterlogged, and the buildings were all discreetly elevated by a meter, with a space underneath to allow flood water to pass when it rained. The terrain was the primary reason that there were no major cities between them and the western border as well. It simply wasn't desirable enough for tribes who had the resources to contend for territory elsewhere to stay. The waitress continued to bring drinks as Carl chatted with the locals about the situation in the area. There were no major incidents lately, which was a good start, but there had been quite a bit of rain, so the roads would be worse than usual between here and the temple. It wasn't open enough to travel by boat, but the Naga group would certainly want to make the last bit of the trip under their own power, as it seemed to be some sort of holy pilgrimage for them. Or at least for their shamans. In fact, it was almost suspiciously quiet in the town, with everything that was going on in the nation to their west. It was only a few hundred kilometers away that things were utter chaos, and the whole army spent all their time fighting monsters that had wandered out of the changing zones. But the tribes here didn't appear to have the same issue, and the problem certainly wasn't a concern this far east. Not only that, but the attacks by the Bomgan army didn't target this region, so they weren't even having problems with foreign spies or curses. It was almost as if Gabble itself were cursed with misfortune. Why did you go to Gabble? That land is dangerous. One of the beasts asked. Carl shrugged. I was with a black dragon, and her goddess demanded that the excess monster population be kept in check. Gabble has had many issues with them in the past, so the death god decided it was time to start putting things back in balance. The locals at the tavern looked suitably impressed with that answer. Though many of them worked hard to build their power, it was mostly so that they would not be suppressed by more powerful forces in the city. It took a unique sort of personality to willingly go out into the wilderness and put your life on the line when you could grow your system stats with trade skills and a vigorous training regimen. Of course, that logic was why so many never reached more than mediocre levels of power, even with long lives. But it was safer and it was better in nearly every mind to live a long and uneventful life than a short and brutal one aiming for the top. That thought naturally had never occurred to Carl. Chapter 1052, The City Never Sleeps. When Lotus came out with an entire cart full of freshly baked sweets, she was an instant hit with the visitors to the tavern. Even the old construction workers who were sitting in a corner, looking grimly at their mugs of ale, were smiling as she passed them a small plate with a selection of baked goods on it. Her enthusiasm for snacks was contagious, and even Carl had chosen to ignore the fact that she had a large mug of coffee on the tray for herself. If she got too hyper, he could just send her back to Ophelia. The sound of blades clashing and wood smashing from outside caught Carl's attention, and the waitress quickly moved to bar the door. "Is the area that bad?" Carl whispered to the man beside him. The werewolf shook his head. "Probably. We sit near the edge of the district, and the Naga get into it with the trolls on a fairly regular basis. The city guard doesn't care how much they break in their brawls, and they never make them pay for the damage. So we just get out of the way or bar the door so that nothing happens to the building." The building itself was made of common field stone, oblong rocks patched together with mortar. If things actually got serious, Carl knew that it wouldn't take much to throw someone through the wall. But it wasn't likely that things would go that far in the city. "You look like you just had a strange thought," the werewolf noted. "I was just thinking that if they were serious about fighting, it wouldn't take much to throw someone through a non-magical fieldstone wall." Carl replied quietly. The werewolf laughed. "You're not wrong. But they're usually not trying to kill each other just to assert dominance. A territory fight of sorts between the two most populous groups." A middle-aged catwoman smirked at Carl. "You say that as if you could also throw someone through the wall." Lotus giggled when she heard the comment and sipped her coffee before patting the woman on the shoulder. "The Carl is a monster in disguise. Forget throwing them through the wall, he could probably throw them out of the city from here. Over the city wall." The woman laughed along with her, but Carl did a quick calculation. If he transformed, he was fairly sure that he could hurl an average-sized troll at least 200 meters. That was far enough to make it over the city wall. Of course, if they were an overlord or totem-ranked troll, it would barely injure them and they would heal before they stopped skidding through the mud. But they would be outside the city. Naga were much more difficult to throw. Remy transformed back to her Naga form and settled down on the bench beside Carl while Lotus continued to make friends. They had time to kill, and she wasn't ready to go up to the room and pretend to sleep. But she had forgotten that the city had tens of thousands of Naga in it. None of them actually slept, they just rested when they didn't have things to do, conserving energy. So, the schedules of everything in the city were adapted to a population that was active at all hours of the day. The markets were always open, and the staff just changed shifts 4 times a day. The same was true for most of the shops, and especially the taverns. One shift would finish drinking and go home, but another would arrive right after. And that was what the crowd did a few minutes later once the fighting outside stopped. There were more customers waiting to come in when the waitress lifted the bar on the doors, but Carl noticed that while the wooden stalls of the vendors on the block were mostly smashed, the ones right in front of the tavern were intact, as if the fight had skipped the spot in front of their building. The waitress sighed as she saw the extent of the damage, then shrugged. Well, at least they spared a few this time. Though they might just have not wanted to annoy the totem. She muttered as she welcomed the next group to their seats, along with 2 more staff members who were quickly served a meal so they could get to work. That also meant a whole new batch of people for Lotus to meet and serve sweets to. The nature priestess was quickly becoming a hit with the patrons, and when they found out that she had completely stocked the pantry of the tavern with stew ingredients and good flour for bread, she became even more popular. Carl realized that would normally be considered very generous payment for simply getting to use the kitchen, especially when she was giving the patrons all the pastries, but that was the way of the dragon clerics. Anywhere that they stopped, they tended to leave behind food, and the better you treated them, the more food they would leave. It could almost be considered a devious tactic to build goodwill and recruit followers, but devious and Lotus didn't belong in the same sentence. It was just impossible to see her as anything but flaky and devoted to her principles. "I should go back to work for the night. I need to make preparations before we reach the temple," Remy announced a few hours later as a third group of patrons was beginning to replace the second. The waitress who had been on shift when they arrived was long gone, but the one on duty quickly brought them the key to a room and refused Carl's attempt to pay for his drinks. "The priestess has provided more than enough. Just please take her with you. Someone taught her about cream liquors and coffee, and it's going to end badly," the waitress whispered. Lotus had mixed them in an ale mug, and there was no doubt that the waitress was absolutely correct. "Lotus, time to go. Ophelia is ready for a nap," Carl called. 5 more minutes. We've got an idea for better egg tarts." Well, that was hard to argue with. Chapter 1053, Backlog of Work. Within half an hour, Lotus was deposited back in the tiny world, escorted by Remy, and Carl headed for the upstairs room. He brought out the Haint and the Epic Guard for company, then took out an elven steel chestplate to do some runic work. Then he stared at it in confusion. This was clearly not armor, or at least not effective armor. Could it be for Ray to put over a leather base? The spider laughed as Carl stared at the thin and flexible plates of metal with ornately decorated breast forms. It's a decorative armor piece for succubi. It's meant to be worn in the bedroom, not the battlefield. Though, knowing succubi, that is kind of the same thing. Ray joked. Well, if that was the case, Carl knew just what sort of enchantments he should put on it. He got right to work planning runes for comfort, agility, stamina regeneration, mana regeneration, and damage reduction. It wasn't a hard combination to make, and normally, it would be the base for some sort of much more grand effect. But for this particular piece, enhancing all of those aspects to the totem rank was precisely what the wearer needed. They didn't need a combat skill, they would only occasionally need serious defensive enhancements, which could be placed on spell gems in accessories. When he was finished, the item hummed with power, and Carl put it back into his inventory, as the guild store was still out of range. They had come a fair distance east, which was closer to Drod, but not quite far enough to put them within range of the shop. With the first piece done, Carl moved on to the next item that Ashbringer had piled into the travel crate for him. It was a simple set of chain and plate pants, designed for a heavy defender. If it wasn't elven steel, the dwarves would love this. Though, once Carl finished, they might not care about what the base material set was. The elven steel was much lighter than the human equivalent of the same name, as well as being worlds apart in durability. So, it could be comfortably worn all day, though it was a bulky design. Again, the runes were deceptively simple but powerful. It was just better to focus on the primary purpose of the item, and leave the accessories and weapon to add the specialty effects. Though, when Carl brought out the third piece and found a set of delicate steel boots with snowflake patterns on them, he thought some should have a suitable effect for their design. Using some runes from Bulwark, Carl granted the boots basic ice creation effects, then added runes for fire resistance to the standard defensive abilities. Those ones would definitely be worth putting up at the auction in Drod when it was time. Carl lay back on the bed while the Haint stared curiously out the window. There were many things in the world that she had not seen yet, and though she had some memories inherited from Lifa, they were mostly on the instinctive genetic level, not detailed like Ray's knowledge of various species. The night passed quickly with very little going on outside other than the steady flow of workers going to and from their jobs. The Haint was disappointed. The other times she had been brought out were to watch for threats. But today it looked like she was only here to see how boring large groups of monsters could be when they weren't crazed by the anomalies. But it was her duty to watch Carl as he meditated, and his progress was sure to make one of the others advance very soon. Her bet was on Kara, despite the badger's laziness. Hawk also had a skill at totem rank effectiveness now, but it wasn't quite the same as Kara's grasp of high-powered skills. Even when she was inactive as a weapon, the Haint was still aware of what happened around her, and analyzing combat effectiveness was the specialty of the Haints. But the living weapon was shocked when the first inklings of advancement did not come from the badger's space, but from Opal's. The butterfly's advancement was subtle, her adolescent body becoming more durable as the totemic blessing formed around it, and she slowly stopped leaking mana. She could still emit it at will to keep the energy in her surroundings balanced, but no longer was she uncontrollably leaking it with every move that she made. This was the point of natural survival for her species, where they could control themselves enough to function. Both the Haint and Carl watched in fascination as Opal began to redecorate her space, throwing a party for herself to celebrate her victory. You could do that in the tiny world and invite everyone. Carl reminded her. Oh, that is a great idea. I can come out and visit with everyone for like 30, no, maybe 20 minutes. Carl tried not to laugh. Interacting with others in person really is that tiring, isn't it? Opal bobbed her wings in agreement. She would return to her space, but she could leave her illusion there, and it would fill in for her once her social battery was exhausted. The other beasts passed over small gifts for her, all tailored to either her nature as an illusionist, or to something in her space. The thoughtfulness would have made Opal tear up if she had eyes. She was realizing that she had underestimated the importance of the affection of family, even though she had been observing it all this time. Now that she had opened up to being included in it, the feeling was quite warm. Even the notoriously unserious Kara and the food-obsessed Hawk had found her appropriate gifts for her advancement. Then Carl finished engraving an illusion element stone with the golem spell, and placed it on the stage in the small practice amphitheater in Opal's space. It's beautiful. I can make better solid illusions for my plays, she gasped. I thought that you might appreciate that. I know that it's not actually an advantage in most of the shows, but now you can have crowd interaction when you want it. I remember that you were reading a book on fake illusionist shows, where they have audience volunteers. Carl explained. Opal flitted around her space in joy. She really did have the best family members. Chapter 1054. Totemic Opal. When everyone else woke up in the morning, there was a massive garden party in the open grass outside the guild house in the tiny world, and the Naga were already present, playing darts with moving targets. The game had been a last-minute addition by Opal, but it had been an instant hit. What are we celebrating? Dana asked when she saw the party decorations. Miss Opal made it to the totem rank last night, officially. It's a bit unusual to have her decorate her own party, but she's the best at it. Carl explained. That made sense to Dana. She was born as a master of the illusionary domain, and as long as nobody was actively trying to damage her illusions, the butterfly could create any scene that she desired instantly. The Naga had been shocked by the elaborate setup, but then Butterfly came out in person. They immediately recognized the slightly unstable aura that marked a recent upgrade. Oh, now I see why the fuss. A new totem is an important day for any clan, even one as powerful as yours. One of the Naga whispered to Remy. Remy nodded happily. More of us should make that point soon, as we all work together despite our different specialties. The goal is to have over half the group be totem ranked within the month. The Naga chuckled at her enthusiasm, then realized that she was completely serious. Remy's confidence that they would actually make it to totem rank was confusing, but infectious. The Naga was excited to have an alliance with a totem-ranked queen, as it would lead to great respect for his people among the surrounding tribes. What he hadn't realized yet was that Remy had no intentions of staying with their clan after she visited the temple. With Opal present, the party could get properly started, and Lotus started bringing out trays of snacks, while Carl did his best to mimic Opal's illusionary abilities to set off fireworks in the sky of the tiny world. But true to her expectations, after saying hello to everyone, receiving their congratulations and floating around for a bit, she was ready to head back to her space. But Kara had a plan. Sister, I set up an obstacle course. Come race me, the Chaos Badger insisted. The course was a set of hoops on sticks planted around the garden at various angles and heights, but for smaller flying species, they were an excellent obstacle course. There is no set order, you just have to pass through them all, Kara insisted, then frowned as she saw that Ray was going around the garden, turning the hoops so that they faced different directions. That would completely change the most efficient route around the course. Ray waved her human form's hands over her head to get their attention. Line up side by side. Ready? Go! The two smallest flyers of the group dashed out around the garden, and Kara realized that even knowing the course in advance wouldn't save her. Sister Opal was incredibly fast, and her agility was on a whole other level. Kara weighed close to 50 kilos, and even with her skill to assist her flying, she still took some time to turn. While Opal was technically larger in wingspan, she weighed closer to 5 kilos, and most of that was her body, as her wings were paper-thin without the need for bone structure. Kara was only a third of the way through the course when Opal finished and the crowd burst into applause. Naksha chuckled. We have a similar course at the Dragon God's Temple in my hometown, and there is no way that any of us could beat a butterfly through an obstacle course. They look slow, the way that they like to float around, but they're really not. Opal ran away only 3 runs through the obstacle course later, ready to rest in her space and sleep to plan her next epic play. None of the Naga were shocked by that. The glass-wing illusionary butterfly was reclusive by nature, and masters of invisibility. The fact that this one had appeared around strangers was already a great show of trust. But it was also almost time for the auction to start. I will stay here with the clan. I would like to know more about the temple. You can take the Dana Mage as your +1. Remy insisted. Carl held out his arm for Dana, then returned to the room, where the Haint and the Epic Guard were still on duty, making sure nobody messed with their room. Dana transformed into fox form and followed Carl out. It should be less conspicuous than showing up in human form in the Beastkin Tavern. But she had forgotten about the side effects of fox charm, and the room fell silent when they walked into the tavern. Everyone seemed mesmerized and afraid to speak until the waitress on duty curtsied and greeted them. Mr. Carl, Lady Dana? Were you staying for breakfast? She asked, not sure where this lovely lady had come from. Had Carl been hiding her somewhere? Keeping her for himself? That was a shame. Such beauty should be revealed to the world. Dana's fluffy ears flicked in amusement at the odd voice of the waitress. No, thank you. We're off to the auction. Carl listed an item, and we received an invitation. She explained, then tried not to frown as all the men in the room sighed the moment she stopped speaking. This effect is ridiculously strong on Beastkin. She complained with a system message. Carl shrugged and winked at one of the Beastkin as he led her toward the door, accompanied by the Haint and Epic Guard. Thank you for your hospitality. We may be back this evening after the auction, if we don't head directly to the temple. The waitress smiled and nodded repeatedly, bobbing her head. I look forward to seeing you both again. Carl stepped outside, and heard the waitress whisper to one of the patrons. I should have known. How could a man like that not already have a wife? But did you see her? OMG. He must be fighting off the suitors everywhere they go. Chapter 1055. Attracting attention. Dana couldn't help but curse Tion's innocent eagerness to help as they walked down the streets, and heads turned to watch her pass. She wasn't even wearing anything fancy, just her usual silk robes and the decorative armor that Ray had made for her. She had been hoping that it would attract less attention than dressing up, as Carl was in a suit. But it didn't seem to help. When they got to the auction house, the two lizardfolk guards looked extra excited, and then enraged when Carl handed them his token and announced he was here with his +1. Your guards can wait in the back standing area with the other servants. One of them growled, then ushered them through. That's not suspicious at all. Dana whispered as they entered. Yeah, something is off. I suspect we've got about 10 minutes before someone does something stupid. Carl agreed. He extended his senses out, and found that there were 2 mythic ranked guests inside the auction house already, and dozens of totems. If things went bad, he would toss Dana in the tiny world at the first sign of trouble. They took their seats, and the totem-ranked beastkin next to Carl nodded politely. Were you auctioning an evening with your courtesan today? He asked quietly. Carl shook his head. I put a master-crafted overlord-ranked weapon up for auction. The beastkin smiled and nodded. That could be even more interesting, though I'm sure some will be disappointed that you flexed on them. Dana looked at him curiously. Flexed on them? The man nodded. Foxkin are known to be the world's greatest lovers other than succubi, with their illusion and charm magic. For that reason, they live like pampered princesses and there are virtually no female foxes among the commoners. They're all nobility or taken in as ranking servants to the royal family, which might as well be nobility. So, it's rare to see one in public at all. So, showing up at an auction with one on your arm might as well be calling all the other attendees peasants. Dana frowned. But you don't seem upset. The beastkin smirked. I am the younger son of the regional governor. Far enough up the ladder that even without a title, I still have a fox and a succubus among my courtesans. Dana thought about his words while Carl thought about his past interactions. He had met many males foxes but few females. But the thing with keeping fox girls as courtesans was definitely a local thing. The demons weren't as enamored with them, and knew them more for their trickery. A transformed silver dragon seated in front of them turned around with an expression that reminded him of the blue dragons when they were exposed to new information. Fox magic is powerful, but here in Nulnulgat it is stronger than usual because our local foxkin are descended from the divine fox lineages. Unlike the common fox beastkin, their power is 100-fold stronger. If I had to guess, I would say that the young lady is from the Stonefur divine fox lineage. She has the feeling of their magic. Tell me, can you use their healing magic? Dana smiled back at the dragon, who served the dragon god of magic, and shook her head. Unfortunately, no. I didn't get healing magic, only a small dose of fox charm and a battle mage type class. That somehow made the dragon even more excited, and he gave the man on Dana's side a pleading look. Fine, I will switch with you, but only because I don't want to be caught in the middle. The troll muttered, completely uninterested in talks of foxes or magical spells. At least her charm didn't overly affect everyone, Dana decided. It was mostly just the beastkin that it affected too much and some of the lizard folk like the guards at the door. The silver dragon lowered his voice, now that they were sitting side by side. If you're trying to find the answers, I think you are. It's beasts and humans. Lizard folk are technically beastkin, though they get their own species name. The other species will find you charming, but not nearly as strongly. Dana nodded in relief, but the dragon was curious. How did you make it this far without learning the extent of your powers? He asked. It's a recent development. I used an experimental potion to advance to overlord rank, and it had divine fox fur in it. The silver dragon was enthralled now. New magic was as exciting to them as new knowledge was to the blue dragons. So, you were not a fox before? He asked. Dana shook her head. Human. The dragon looked startled. Now, that is shocking. But that might be because I'm originally from Copy, and the humans there are almost all slaves or menial workers. Letting them grow in power is unusual. Dana frowned. They would have to add that place to the list of places to avoid. Though if she remembered right, Copy was mostly dragons and dragonkin with a few lesser reptile species. The majority of the group would probably be fine there. We're from Drod. The demons are much less particular, she offered. The dragon nodded in understanding. Yes, demons and humans have an odd relationship. They pretend to despise each other, but in practice they live together without any real issues, as the demons only respect strength and don't try to stop others from growing their power. The auctioneer took the stage and took out a small crystal orb. She cast a spell, and the orb glowed softly, amplifying noise from its immediate vicinity. Welcome, dear guests, to the Kathar auction. Today we will be starting off with a bang. We have procured a rare item for you all to bid on. An epic-grade overlord-ranked blade made of pure elven steel. The auction house filled with quiet chatter. That was impressive but not shocking. Then she continued. And the blade has been enchanted by a rune master, granting a wide variety of enhancements, far beyond the standard of any regular blade. Hello everyone, this is Shadow. Due to copyright restrictions on YouTube, I can't publish many of the audiobooks you love. That's why I've created a special paid service where you can enjoy over 300 high-quality audiobooks from platforms like Webnovel, Pocket FM, Audible, Wuxia, and more. Each novel comes as a one-time purchase, no subscriptions, no hidden fees. After payment, you'll receive full access via Telegram, along with all future updates for that novel. You'll find a wide selection of your favorite genres and titles, always in premium audio quality. Check the full list of available novels in the description. DM me now to get your favorite stories in audiobook form and start listening today.